prebiotic soup exploded, prebiotic cholent exploded. And we've evolved. Previously we have been chimps. They have evolved from apes. They have evolved from monkeys. He says, Daddy, but how did it begin? Well, he says it began as gas and bacteria. Comes back to his mother, and he says, Mom, I'm very confused about Bar Mitzvah speech. I'm going to talk about where we come from, but I have this contradiction. You tell me we come from God, and Adam, and Eve, and Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. Dad tells me we come from apes, and chimps, and monkeys, gas, and bacteria. What am I supposed to say? His mother looks at him and says, Dear son, there's no contradiction. Your father was talking about his side of the family. And I'm talking about my side of the family. It really works. You know, we each have two sides in the family. Not necessarily your husband or your wife, but within inside of us, there's two sides of the family. And I think it's a good prelude to our vital theme this evening about tuning into the energy of this time of the year. It was Saturday night not long ago, and the traditional Ashkenazi custom is on Saturday night to eat pizza. Last night we also had pizza. Recently we added sushi. Pizza has been a mainstay from before Egypt. So this Jew Saturday night calls up the pizza shop. We say, hello? He says, is this Gordon's Pizza? The person says, no sir, this is Google Pizza. He says, this was always Gordon's Pizza. He said, that's true, but last month Google bought off Gordon's Pizza. Google has a custom of buying off different things, and we now own Gordon's Pizza. He says, okay, whatever it is, I'd like to order a pie of pizza. The person behind the phone says, do you want the usual, sir? He says, what's the usual? You know me? He says, well, according to our caller ID data sheet, the last 29 times you called this pizza shop, you ordered an extra large pizza with extra large cheese, with heavy dough, with mushrooms, with onions, with jalapeno, with black pepper, with red pepper, on a very thick crust, 3 bottles of Coca-Cola, plus vanilla sweet ice cream. He says, yes, that's exactly what I want. The person says, may I suggest that this time you order a pizza that's gluten-free, with celery, spinach, with kale, with sun-dried tomatoes, with olives. It should be a very thin crust. Instead of the Coke, I'll give you a bottle of water, and no ice cream. And he says, absolutely not. I detest vegetables, and I don't like water. I want Coke. Well, the person says, you know, your cholesterol is not doing well. He's furious. He says, how do you know about my cholesterol? He says, well, we cross-referenced your home number with your medical records. And we have the results of your blood tests over the last 9.5 years. You really need to take care of your cholesterol. The guy is mad. He says, okay, I have to take care of my cholesterol, but I don't want your rotten, horrible vegetables. I already take medication for my cholesterol, and I don't need your guidance. Excuse me, sir, the man says, but you have not taken your medication regularly. How do you know? Well, according to our database, you only purchased a box of 30 cholesterol tablets once, and it was 7 months ago. Well, that was from one drugstore, but I bought more from another drugstore. Well, that doesn't show up on your credit card statement. He says, I paid in cash. But you did not withdraw enough cash, according to your bank statement. He said, I have other sources of cash. Well, that doesn't show on your last tax return. Unless you bought them using an undeclared income source, which is against the law. This poor man, Yankel, has a meltdown. At this point, he's not just angry, he's infuriated. Well, who do you think you are? You're going to give me these lectures. He says, I'm sorry, sir, but we use this information with the sole intention of helping you and helping your quality of life. He says, I'm sick and tired with quality of life and with you helping me. I am sick to death of Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, Telegram, TikTok, and all the others. I'm moving to an island. No internet, no cable TV, no cell phone service, nobody to watch on me, nobody to spy on me, and nobody to tell me what type of pizza to order and how much cash I have. The person says, I understand, but you need to renew your passport. It expired 6 weeks ago. There is a very famous prayer or declaration that is said in all synagogues in the coming days of Rosh Hashanah. Each time after we blow the shofar during the Musaf, the communities around the world declare those three fateful words, Hayom Haras Olam, or Hayom Harat Olam. Literally, it means today is the birthday of the world, the birthday of the universe. Some communities sing it, Hayom Harat Olam. And one of the great commentators on the Siddur, he wrote a commentary on the Siddur. He lived in the 14th and 15th century. His name was Rabbi David Avudraham. He wrote a commentary on the prayer book. He asks a fascinating question. He says, where did they get this term, Haras Olam? Today is the birthday of the world. The answer is, like many of the prayers, it comes from text of the Tanakh, of the Bible. This is no exception. It comes from Jeremiah. The term Haras Olam originates in the book of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, the prophet. But if you go to the source, I think it's in chapter 20 of Jeremiah, the context is not just different, but completely of an opposite nature. Jeremiah was a prophet who suffered terribly. He, of course, prophesied about the pending destruction of the temple, and he watched it happen. He wrote a book called Jeremiah, he wrote a book called Lamentations, Eicha. And in one point in his life, he wishes that he was never born. He wishes that he never saw the light of day. And at one point, he says these powerful and very difficult words to hear. He says, I wish that I would have been a stillborn. I would have died in my mother's womb. The words he uses, Haras Olam Rachma. If my mother's womb would keep me contained there so that I would be eternally pregnant. Haras means pregnant, hara, olam means forever. I wish I was eternally pregnant, which means I was never born. I would die in the womb. The sages took these words, Haras Olam, and they put it into the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, again and again and again. But a very funny change. If you open an English machzer, it says today is the birthday of the world. In the original text, Haras doesn't mean birthday, it means pregnancy. And Olam doesn't mean the world, it means forever. Olam has two interpretations, eternity and the universe, the world, the cosmos. So they took the same words and they completely redefined it. Imagine if we say Hayom Haras Olam means today is the day of eternal pregnancy. No machzer would translate it that way, but that's the real translation. Today is the day of eternal pregnancy. Really? Wow, inspiring. Even the men? What does that mean? So it's not translated as the birthday of the world. So Jeremiah said, I wish I would have remained eternally pregnant. They took those words, they put it into the text of the Rosh Hashanah prayer book after the blowing of the shofar. Hayom Haras Olam, today is the birthday of the world. The word Haras, which means pregnant, they turned into birth. Olam, which means eternal, they turned into world. This is the question Rabbi David Avudraham asks. Why did they do this to the verse in Jeremiah? There's another fascinating thing that this is Rosh Hashanah. I want to go to Yom Kippur for a moment. Yom Kippur, we read about the high priest's service in the Holy of Holies. And when he finished his service, on his way out, right before he came out, we know that he had tefillah k'tzara. He would utter a very short prayer, not long, because if it would be long, people would get afraid. Did he make it out? Did he survive? So it had to be a very brief prayer, right before he left the Holy of Holies. And we repeat that prayer every year, Yom Kippur, in our own Musaf, in our own Avodah. And we look at the choice. What did he pray for? If it's Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, the holiest person, the holiest place, there's a very brief prayer. Literally, it's a 5-second prayer, 10 to 20-second prayer. And he prays for different things that affect the Jewish people. For example, he prays that there should be a year of rain, of prosperity, no famine, people should have what to eat. He prays that the Jewish presence in the Holy Land should not be obliterated. Jews should be able to maintain their own military and political and spiritual sovereignty in the Holy Land. And then he prays for something else. Shana shaloi sapil isha pri bidna. A year in which no woman should have a miscarriage. And I always found it strange. It's a nice prayer. No woman should have a miscarriage. But why don't you pray for everybody to have health? For the children to be healthy, for the mothers to be healthy, for the fathers to be healthy. There's so much to pray for. From all the requests, he tunes into this. No woman should have a miscarriage this year. And then he comes out of the Holy of Holies. What's the meaning of this? Why? I'm going to pose a third question. I'm a Jew. We ask questions. Third question is, I touched upon this in the women's class yesterday in the Aguda, but I want to take it a little further today. And that is, if you ask a Jew, what's the holiest prayer in the year? What's the holiest night of the year? Everybody says Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre. Kol Nidre is very special. Even Jews who don't come out all year, they come Yom Kippur to the synagogue at least for Kol Nidre. Even the tune of Kol Nidre is unique. It's dramatic. It's heart-wrenching. It's very moving. Ahai, ahai, ahai. But I always say it's a mazel. Most Jews don't read Aramaic. Because if you'd actually read Aramaic and understand it, and look at the lyrics of Kol Nidre, it would be a letdown. Usually a heart-stirring melody is composed for heart-stirring words. Kol Nidre is not even a prayer, it's a legal declaration. And I hate to say this so bluntly, it's very uninspiring. In fact, what Kol Nidre essentially says, and I don't mean to be a party pooper, but you've done it a couple of years, I assume you've heard of Kol Nidre. Basically what we're saying is there's a problem. Jews don't always keep their promises. Sounds familiar? Not only Jews, people. The Torah says when you promise something, you have to keep it. Words are sacred. So what do we do on Yom Kippur when everybody comes to the synagogue? What's the first thing we do? We basically make a legal declaration. Any promise I'm going to make this year doesn't mean anything. So that way, even if I make a promise, I'm not responsible because I already annulled it. So let's say I make a promise on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, no cheesecake for me this year, which would be a good thing. I'm just talking about me. And I forgot to say, bli neder, it's a vow. On Yom Kippur I say, don't worry. Whatever I make up this year, it's not too serious. Granted, maybe it saves people from committing the sin of violating their pledges. But how did this declaration become associated with the climax, with the essence of Yom Kippur? We start off the holiest night, Kol Nidre, all promises. And how about the tune? The tune is so strange when you match it with the lyrics. It's very weird. You know, the tune of Kol Nidre touches people's hearts, but when you listen to the words, and again, use an English machzor and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's so anticlimactic, it's so strange, it's very, very absurd. Just to illustrate it, and you'll forgive me, I'm no chazan, and I'm no cantor. But I want to illustrate my point, okay? Listen when somebody does it in English. Ahai, 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 all my promises. And all my pledges, and all my bands, and all my oaths, and all my promises. Da-da-da-da-dum, that I accept on myself. They should be null, they should be void, they should be non-existent. None of them mean a thing. Nidrona, my promises are no promises. And my pledges are meaningless. And my oaths are no oaths. Inspiring or what? And if you didn't get it, we do this 3 times. And each time we raise our voice. And it goes up in a crescendo. Thank God most people don't know what in the world they're talking about when they say Kol Nidre. It's almost like, God, save the queen, save the king, save the Commonwealth, save America, save my family. That's not what you're saying. All you're saying is that whatever you promise next year means absolutely nothing. This perturbed so many commentators and historians. Some people said maybe the reason is because it was referring to the Spanish Jews who converted. They made a promise to the church that they're not Jews anymore, they're Christians. And on Yom Kippur, secretly, they came to the synagogue, and the first thing they said is, we want to annul our vow to the church. What we promised the church, that we're Catholics, we're not Jews, is meaningless. Maybe that's what triggers their emotion. It's a nice explanation. The only problem is that the text of Kol Nidre dates hundreds of years before the Spanish Inquisition. So there must be something else. There must be something deeper. I don't know how many of you have visited Frankfurt, but in Frankfurt, there's a beautiful, beautiful shul. It seats thousands of people. And the chazan they bring in from Israel every year is a Jew named Tzaddik Weingarten. They call him Tzaddik. And once there's a Jew from Israel, his name is Moshe Erlanger. He shared the story. He went to Frankfurt for business, and there was a problem getting back with the plane on Yom Kippur, to Israel on time, because there was a delay, and he had to stay in Kippur in Frankfurt, so he booked himself a room in the hotel, and he went to the main synagogue. He obviously went with his slippers. He came in, the Gabbai gave him a seat. He missed his home and his family, wanted to be home for Yom Kippur, but he had no choice. And the chazan Tzaddik Weingarten, who comes from Israel each year for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to pray in Frankfurt, started Kol Nidre. And Moshe Erlanger said, he never heard such a beautiful Kol Nidre. The cantor broke down sobbing. He never saw such a thing. It was such a heartfelt Kol Nidre all the way in Frankfurt. In Israel, he never heard such a Kol Nidre. So after the prayer, he went over to the cantor and he said, what makes you so emotional by Kol Nidre? And he says, you ask the question, you deserve an answer. And maybe that's why you had to get stuck in Frankfurt to hear the story. And And the cantor, Rabbi Tzudek Weingarten, turns to his guest, Rabbi Moshe, and he says, I'll tell you the story. He says, I've been coming here for many, many years. He's a cantor. The community brings him in from Israel to Frankfurt 3 days a year to pray. And he says, for me, it's very moving. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. So to come back to Frankfurt in Germany and be in a big shul with 2,000 seats is so moving to be able to see the rejuvenation of Klal Yisrael, the resurrection of the Jewish people post-Holocaust. One year, Reb Tzadok says, I finished my cantorial melodies, and it's not easy for a cantor on Yom Kippur, you know, right? I hope you realize that. Especially this case where he did everything. So there's the evening service, and there's the morning, and there's late morning, and there's afternoon, and then there's the Ne'ilah. And remember, he doesn't have a bite, and he doesn't drink, there's no water. It's not easy, and to carry a voice, and there's thousands of people, and you got to do a good job. Reb Tzadok says, I finished Yom Kippur prayer. It was a relief. I can go back and get a drink. I took off my talis. I folded up my kittel, my white coat. I put it in the stender. The janitor already finished cleaning up. I was the last one to leave. The lights were off. And I leave the synagogue from the side gate. And I'm happy to go back to my hotel and eat something and take a drink. And tomorrow we'd fly back to Israel for Sukkot. And Reb Tzadok says, as he's walking out from the front gate of the big synagogue of Frankfurt, a Jew approaches him. The Jew looks like around 60 years old. Takes out a kippah from his pocket, a yarmulke from his pocket. One of these yarmulkes that you could see are worn once a year. And he turns to the chazan, to Reb Tzudek Weingarten, and he says in Yiddish, half German. This is a German city. He says, Heim bei Nacht ist nicht kol nidre, wo seinen alle? Isn't tonight kol nidre? Where is everybody? And the cantor doesn't say anything. He says, it's usually packed here. Why are the gates closed? The light is off. Isn't tonight Yom Kippur? And the chazan realizes that this Jew miscalculated it. By a day, he came the night after Yom Kippur instead of the night of Yom Kippur. But he didn't have a heart to tell him. So he was quiet. The man gets agitated. He says, why don't you answer me? For was entfest diminished. Why don't you answer me? Why is nobody here? Why are the gates closed? Isn't it Yom Kippur tonight? He realized he got to spill the beans, and he says, I'm so sorry. Yom Kippur was last night. Everybody already left. Yom Kippur is over. Everybody went home. I'm also going home. The Jew broke down sobbing like a baby. He says, why are you sobbing? He says, Oy, I'm not Jewish anymore. He says, why do you say that? And he looks at him and he says, you know, my parents survived the Holocaust, moved to Germany, very secular Jews. But one thing Jewish we did, my father and mother took me every Yom Kippur to synagogue. And before his death, my father told me, if you want to remain a Jew and connected to Judaism, Yom Kippur, you go to synagogue. He says, I never missed a Kol Nidre in 60 years of my life. This is the first year I missed it. I'm not Jewish anymore. I lost my connection. He's sobbing. Reb Tzudek, the cantor, is thinking to himself, Ribono Shel Olam, what does Hashem want me to do? He looks at this Jew and he says, don't worry. You're still Jewish. You're still connected. We could do Kol Nidre together in the synagogue tonight. He puts his hand on the shoulders of this Jew. They both walk in to the dark Frankfurt synagogue, 2,000 empty seats. He puts on the lights in the front. He takes out a talus and a kittel and he puts it on this Jew. He gives him a prayer book and he sits down in the front. He puts on his kittel goes to the stender, goes to the pulpit, and there's not a single soul in the shul besides him and this Russian German Jew. And it's the night after Yom Kippur. And the Tzuddik, the cantor, says, I start Kol Nidre. The only prayer this Jew knows. And he says, usually I have 2,000 people, and to be honest, I want to impress them. I'd like to get the job again next year. I can't say every cantor thinks of that, but some do. I'm thinking about the audience. Do they like me? Do they love me? How is my voice? What's going on? What does the president think? What does the philanthropist think? What does the schnorrer think? What does the gvir think? But that night, nobody there. Nobody there. It was me and this Jew who knew nothing about Judaism and God. And I started to say Kol Nidre, and I just broke down sobbing because I felt there was such authenticity in the ear. This Jew came to life. And I felt like I was singing just for Hashem and for the 6 million Jews. And I finished Kol Nidre, and I never had such an emotional, spiritual experience in my life. My voice resonated far and wide. He has a beautiful voice. Only for this Jew and Hashem. And this Jew was also crying. I finished. We did some prayers, some Shema. I turned around and I said, you got your Kol Nidre. He says, I'm Jewish. He gave me a hug. He said, you'll never know what you did for me. He left. At this point, I deserved to have a drink of water. After a rerun of Yom Kippur, I went to my hotel, I relaxed, went back to Israel. The next year I came back, and when I started Kol Nidre, the scene came back to me. And I thought, even though there's 2,000 people, I'm just singing for God and one Jew. And it was so emotional that each year when I do Kol Nidre, I remember that scene and I sob. And he says, the year after, I come to Kol Nidre and this Jew is there. He came on time. He came on time. He got his seat. And he said, you'll never know what you did for me. So he tells Rabbi Moshe, that's my Kol Nidre. And when I heard the story, Rabbi Moshe shared the story, I thought to myself, it was a beautiful, beautiful gesture from the cantor who understood the calling of the moment. You know, he could have become a technocrat like some people are. You know what I mean? Sorry, Kippur is over. You're not Jewish, that's fine. But he understood the calling of the moment. Bring him in and do Kol Nidre. That's moving. But then I realized the story is also such a powerful parable for people's lives. Because very often, what happens is a person feels that I come, I show up, but the gates are closed. They say that there were 3 very modern, progressive rabbis in Manhattan who were talking about how modern their shuls are. And one rabbi says, you know, we're really an updated, liberal, progressive synagogue. Everyone who comes in Yom Kippur to the synagogue gets a sandwich with 2 sushi rolls. So they can have a beautiful Yom Kippur. The other rabbi says that's old-fashioned. We are really progressive. Near every seat, there's a tablet. And there's free Wi-Fi. That way the prayers get boring. You like that idea? So bad. The prayers get boring, the rabbi's sermon doesn't work. You go, you check your email, yeah? Netflix, the Queen, there's a lot going on these days. Funerals, mices. You can do your thing, I'm a chaya, you can answer all your letters. The third rabbi said, big deal, we're truly progressive. It comes this time of the year, we put up a big sign on top of the shul, closed for the holidays. But emotionally, I often come, we want our hearts to be open, but we find the gates are closed and our hearts are closed. And like that Jew We say, why is nobody here? Why is it dark? Why is nothing here? Why am I the one who missed it? And so often people write themselves off. I'm late again. I missed it again. I'm not talking here in terms of the clock. I may be on time. I'm talking here in terms of the emotional connection. And what that story taught me is there's no such a thing. That Jew missed everything, but he missed nothing. He showed up. The gates were closed, but God sent him the right person to tell him, no, you'll have your own kol nidre. You have your own intimate connection. You have your own intimate relationship. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, of blessed memory, Rabbi YY Soloveitchik once said, yesterday in the Aguda, I shared one commentary on the Mishnah. Today I'm going to share another commentary on the Mishnah that I heard from Rabbi Greenblatt this morning. The last Mishnah of Yuma, Rabbi Akiva says, Jews, Ashreichem Yisrael, you're so fortunate. Who cleanses you? Your Father in heaven. And the obvious question is, do you need Rabbi Akiva to tell you that our Father in heaven cleanses us? This is like the axiom of Judaism, that God cleanses us. 1,000 years, 1,500 years before Rabbi Akiva. The answer is Rabbi Akiva was the first generation after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70. Yom Kippur, the highlight of Yom Kippur was the high priest doing the service in the Holy Temple, going into the Holy of Holies. And Yom Kippur revolved around the high priest in the Holy of Holies. The 2 goats and the ox, and the atonement for him and his family, and the priest and the Jewish people, and the scapegoat, and the blood in front of the ark and on the altar. It was Levitic. Everything around the temple and the high priest was the highlight of the year. He wasn't allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. And then comes the generation of Rabbi Akiva, and Yom Kippur comes and there's no temple. The Romans burnt it to the ground. There's no high priest. In fact, the high priest was murdered. Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol was murdered by the Romans. There's no Holy of Holies. There's no goats. There's no offerings. Yom Kippur came and Jews felt depressed. There was nothing to do. It was empty. It was hollow. Amar Rabbi Akiva! Rabbi Akiva said, Ashreichem Yisrael. Even without a temple, even without a high priest, even without a sheep, even without goats and oxen, you know who cleanses you this Yom Kippur? Your Father in heaven. Even without the fanfare, without the drama, even without the spiritual fireworks, even without the amazing, amazing revelations and the services in Jerusalem and the Holy Temple, I want you to know this Yom Kippur, who cleanses you? Your Father in heaven. Direct, intimate, heart to heart, face to face. You don't need all the accompaniments. You don't need all the intermediaries. You don't need all of the experience. It would be great. It would be beautiful. It would be awesome. But don't think you have no Yom Kippur. It's direct and intimate love relationship between you and your Father and Mother in heaven, Rabbi Akiva said. And here is where the true question and dilemma of life happens. Hayom Haras Olam. Today is the birthday of the world. Is it or is it not? One of the great questions, and here was the brilliance of our sages who took 2 words which means eternally pregnant, and turned it into the birthday of the world. Because that was exactly the question they wanted us to contemplate and ponder. Will this Rosh Hashanah become the birthday of my world, the birthday of the world, or will this Rosh Hashanah be a day in which I will remain eternally pregnant? Every human being is pregnant with potential. Some human beings, the holy women among us, God has blessed them and us with the ability to bring life in a very physical sense. But every single person is pregnant with potential, with dreams. Every person carries within their imagination callings, vocations, ideas, ambitions, dreams. And yet, for so many of us, those dreams die. They die in our womb. They're not actualized. They're not materialized. So on Rosh Hashanah we say, Hayoim Haras Olam, and it means two separate things, and the only one who can define the meaning is you and me. I'm the one who has to answer the question, will today be the day that I will be born, or will today be the day that I will remain for another year pregnant with potential, and those potentials shall die in utero? How many people do you know? How many people do I know? And maybe it starts with myself, with yourself, with ourselves. You feel a drive. You feel an ambition. You have a yearning. You have imagination. You would love, in theory, to see X, Y, Z happen in terms of your own life, your relationships, your careers, your impact. And yet, it never comes out. It remains stagnant, and it dies prematurely. It's a challenge. There was a baby camel, and the baby camel turned to its mom. Yeah. And the baby camel said, Mom, can I ask you a few questions? And the mom said, of course. The baby camel said, why do we have 3 ugly toed legs, feet? I don't like it. And mom said, you think we're like the other lazy mammals who do nothing all day? We trek thousands of miles through the deserts. We need good sturdy feet. Mom, why these ugly eyebrows? Mom says, you think we're like the other lazy mammals who do nothing? We go through the Sahara Desert, there are sandstorms. Mother Nature gave us these eyebrows to protect our eyes from the sandstorms. Mommy, why these grotesque humps? Why can't we just have flat, handsome backs that would impress the boys? Why these elevated, weird humps? Mom said, do you think we're lazy like the other mammals? We trek thousands of miles. We can go for weeks, for months without water, without food. The only ones how? We have a fat reserve in those humps. And when there's no water and there's no food, we use that fat reserve. And then the humps flatten down until we get more water. She says, Mom, one more question. We have 3-toed ugly feet so we can trek thousands of miles through the desert. We have disgusting eyebrows to protect our eyes from sandstorms as we trek thousands of miles through the desert. We have these weird, strange, repulsive humps to reserve our fat and water and food and nutrients as we trek thousands of miles through the desert without food or water. So I have one last question, Mom. If this is the case, what in the world are we doing locked up in a cage in the zoo? So on Yom Kippur, when the high priest is about to come out of the Holy of Holies, he asks one last question. It should be a year in which no woman miscarries. Biologically, but also spiritually. He knows that when Jews go into the Holy of Holies, they become pregnant with so much creativity and wisdom and potential and goodness. But what happens so often is we experience a miscarriage. Those dreams never come to fruition. There's never birth. They die in utero. I ask you, God, it should be a year in which those internal, powerful convictions, callings, ambitions, I should have the courage to actually bring them forth, bring them out. The great rabbi at Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin in Lithuania was a man known as the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. And he published many, many works in Jewish scholarship. And one of the books that he published, there was a party, a feast, and he turned to his students and he said, I want to share with you how I came to write these books. He said, I didn't do well in school. I was a pretty lousy student. Today we'd be diagnosed ADD, ADHD, PDD. Then there was one diagnosis for everybody. It was called a FRAS. But I didn't do well in school. And one night I went to bed and I hear my father tell my mother, we tried so many years with him. His name was Hirschel, Naftali Hirschel. Tomorrow I'm bringing him to the carpenter of town. He's good with his hands and he's going to become an assistant for the carpenter, and he'll become a woodworking guy. And he's going to build beautiful things because he can't continue learning. And I heard this in my bed. And I came out and I said, Tate, give me another chance. He said, you've been trying for years. It's not for you. It's fine. Not everybody was made to sit on a bench for 12, 20, 30 years and learn. Some people need to use their hands and build beautiful, beautiful pieces of furniture. It's also a wonderful vocation. And the Netziv, who was one of the greatest rabbis of the century, tells his father, give me one more chance. He says, tomorrow is your last day in school. We're going to the carpenter afterwards. He says, the next day, I decided to be diligent. And he literally became one of the greatest Torah scholars of the generation. And he turned to his students and he says, why? Why did I do it? He said, I'll tell you why. I was a good carpenter. And he says, everybody, when your day comes and you face God, God asks you, what did you do for a living? You know how Jews say, what do you do for a living? Because God says, what do you do for a living? And I would tell God I was a carpenter. So God would say, let me see. And I would show him the stender, and I would show him the ark, and I would show him the bima, and I would show him the table, and the benches. And God would say, psst, psst, azaytz and azelches. But Reb Naftali, I have a question. Where's your Hamik Dover? That's his commentary on Chumash. Where's your Harchev Dover? That's his second commentary on Chumash. Where's your Imrei Shefer? His commentary on the Haggadah. Where's your Hamik She'ela? His commentary on the She'iltas. Where's your Ebed de Beirav? His commentary on Sifri. And he went through the works. He says, God would have asked me, where are all these books? And I wouldn't have what to answer. And when I remembered that, I decided I got to go learn. A few years ago, there was a big Lithuanian Rosh Yeshiva, and he had a bunch of students, and he was not happy with their level of learning. He felt they're wasting their time. He said, you're all sitting on a bench here doing nothing for 20 years. Let me tell you what's going to happen when you come up to heaven. God is going to ask you, what do you do your whole life? You're going to say, I was in Koilel, I learned my whole life. God will say, psst, beautiful, but I have a question. Where's the stender? Where's the ark? Where's the bima? Where's the table? Where's the desk? So the high priest prays a year in which nobody should experience a miscarriage. Physically, biologically, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. A year in which a person should have the courage to say to themselves, I'm not going to remain pregnant with ideas. I'm going to give birth. I'm going to materialize. I'm going to actualize. Haras Olam, not eternally pregnant. Haras Olam, today will be the birthday of my world. The big question, of course, is, my friends, why is it? Why is it that so many of us allow ourselves and our dreams to die in utero? Why is it? What is it? Shimon Peres was president of Israel. He died at 94 a few years ago. His son, before he died, said, Abba, what would you like me to write on your tombstone? He was 94 years old. He said, here lay a man who died prematurely because of the dreams he had. Prematurely. What is it that allows so many of us to kill our dreams prematurely, almost inadvertently? What is it? Deep down, we would love to have an amazing marriage, but it's a dream and it doesn't happen. Deep down, you would love to have an incredible relationship with your children. deep down you would love to confront. They abduct our souls. They take our higher selves and crush them and reduce us to small people. They put us in a cage so that the camel is locked up in a cage, even though it has all the resources to travel the world and trek through difficult deserts, but I'm locked up in a cage. Why? What is this cage? And the answer, of course, is a very individual one for each one of us. But one thing we could say with much certainty, with relative certainty, and that is, in each and every single one of us sitting in this room, wherever we are, each and every single one of us has those components inside of us, those voices, that belief system, those thoughts, those sensations, those experiences that make me feel that I'm limited. And they keep me imprisoned and confined and incarcerated emotionally. And let's face it, it may be one thought, one belief that entered my brain, entered into your brain when you were 3 years old, 4 years old. Maybe as a result of your mom or your dad or a teacher or somebody else in the world. And it gave me a belief about myself. It was just one thought. But that became the defining thought of my life. That thought, maybe, I don't deserve to be loved. Maybe, I'm damaged goods. Maybe, I'm the timid, meek type that nobody likes to hear. Or maybe the thought is, better that nobody sees me. Let me remain undercover for the rest of my life. Anybody relates to any of this? Don't answer. Maybe that thought is, the world is a very dangerous place. Never trust. Maybe that thought is, never create real relationships because they'll come back to haunt you and bite you. And that person will stab you in your chest so you will say, Et tu, Brute, then Caesar falls. That one thought at 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 that plays itself out in my relationships, in my marriage, in my connections, in my interactions, in my work. It plays itself out when I'm 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 70, and I don't even know that I am paralyzed. I'm restricted by those thoughts or belief systems that create now ideas and sensations and experiences and emotions and philosophies that are now built basically on a wounded self-image from belief systems that are impaired as a result of experiences consciously and maybe even subconsciously. I don't even know what it is. And how tragic is it for so many people who are not even aware that they are unaware. At least if I have anxiety, it's a gift from God to serve as my alarm clock. And I don't mean to say that anxiety is the biggest gift. I know it's not a gift, but it's a gift in the sense that it could wake me up. Maybe you could find out why you're so anxious. Why? Woody Allen used to say, the great Kabbalist Woody Allen says, I'm feeling bored and I think I'm the cause. You know, it's not the rabbi's sermon. Forgive me. I was once at a speech. The speaker before me was so boring that everybody fell asleep. And then I noticed something. He also fell asleep. I was the only one up because I was the next speaker. But it was good. Everybody was sleeping. I just ran home. It was gewaldic. One of the better nights of my life. At least anxiety saying there's something wrong, right? Sometimes my nerves are gone. I could burn my finger. I don't even feel the pain. Sometimes I'm so detached. I'm not even feeling the stress. There's not even a protest. I'm so dead that I don't even know I'm dead. Dead man walking. It's so sad when you see people. You know, a lot of couples come to me, marriage crisis, they're getting divorced, and I could see trauma all over his face and trauma all over her face. He believes that she's the cause of all of his anxiety. She believes he's the cause of all of their anxiety. It doesn't even dawn upon them that they're not capable of being in a relationship because he is not reacting to his wife. He is reacting to a perpetrator when he was 6 years old. He's reacting to somebody in the room who's not been there for 45 years. But in his mind, that's his only way of surviving. I can't even judge him. Viktor Frankl said, between stimuli and reaction, there's an empty space. And in that empty space, all human growth exists. What happens if I don't have that empty space? I have no choice. That empty space is where Bechira lives. That's where choice lives. What happens if you say to me something and I react from a place of survival? I don't have that empty space. I don't have the ability to observe what just happened. I don't see the stimuli that's coming into me and then watching my crazy reaction to you imploding or exploding. Fight or flight or freeze or fawn. I can't even see it because I'm completely enraptured in the cage, in the prison, because that is my survival. And then I build philosophies around it. And I asked the father, why don't you show love to your children? His wife said he never shows it. Why don't you show love? He says, the philosophy of our family is not to show love. I said, the philosophy of your family? Let's put it a little differently. The trauma of Hitler maybe means that we had to cut off all of our emotions to survive. Let's call it the trauma of Hitler. Let's not call it the philosophy of the family. Life was too painful. Relationships were too painful. Don't judge it. Have compassion, but don't turn it into a philosophy. Emotions are hard. Emotions are messy, right? Emotions are vulnerable. If there's no emotions, life is safe. But you know what? For that we have artificial intelligence, and they do much better than us. There's a reason God created people with emotions. He doesn't want me to be an artificial zombie. Emotions is the world where relationships are created, where human vulnerability exists, where people connect in their gut. But I'm frightened. I can't. So what's the first thing you have to do on Yom Kippur if you don't want to have a miscarriage? The first thing, you got to sing Kol Nidre. Now come back with me to Kol Nidre and you'll see it has an entirely different meaning than we might have assumed originally. And this is a very powerful thought of the Baal HaTanya, Rabbi Shnei Zalman of Liadi, who said, there's different types of promises we make in life. There's a promise, there's a vow, there's a pledge I make in life. I won't eat cheesecake. I won't eat babka. No carbs. Spinach juice. Wheatgrass juice. 2.5 hours in the gym. Yoga, Pilates, therapy, somatic, energy stuff, meditation. You know the resolutions, right? They do it in St. Louis. Promises, beautiful promises. But there's other promises I make to myself. You know what these promises are? They're not even conscious. Many of them are subconscious. It's the promise I make to myself when I say, I can't have an amazing marriage. I'm too wounded. I can't have an amazing marriage. I'm too angry. I can't have an amazing marriage. I'm too explosive. I can't have an amazing marriage. I'm too insecure. I can't have an amazing marriage. Too much water has come under the bridge. That's also a promise. That's also an oath. I make an oath to myself, I can't really connect with my children. I can't really connect with my grandchildren. We can't have the most amazing family experience possible because I am a detached trauma victim. Plus I have been diagnosed as having narcissistic personality disorder. Plus I have addiction. Plus I am wounded. Plus I am insecure. And I love gambling too and drinking as well. What a beautiful description. I know who I am, and I can swear this is who I am, and I can swear I am not the guy to change any of that. Woman or man, We all have oaths and promises and pledges we make to ourselves, and maybe we've been making to ourselves for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Nobody older than that here. Consciously or subconsciously, you all look so young and creative and vivacious. These pledges I've been making to myself, my neural pathways have made promises. These are the only trajectories for your life. These are the only places to go. But Yom Kippur comes, and Yom Kippur is the day that the Jewish soul goes into the Holy of Holies and it sets itself free. And Yom Kippur is the day that God tells the soul, Ashreichem Yisrael, you are infinite consciousness having a finite experience. And even if you experience trauma, and even if you experienced a life that was so restricted in many ways, let me tell you who you are. At your core, you are divine infinity. Your soul is a chelik elokam imal mamish. It's a piece of God. You are a derivative of infinite consciousness. You are a fragment of the divine. You are an ambassador of infinity in this world. And if you are an ambassador of infinity, shluchai shel adam k'maaseh, the shliach possesses the properties of the one who sent him. You are a manifestation of the Rebbeinu Shalom in our cosmos. You are the light of the divine. No experience, no abuse, no trauma, no complex trauma, no developmental trauma, no PTSD. As powerful as they are, and they're powerful, and as limiting and restricting they are, no one of them could snuff out the core of your soul and the core of your body, which is divine. God is indestructible, and if you are a derivative of God's infinite consciousness, you're also indestructible at your core. Your soul may be in exile. Your core may be hidden away behind layers of debris and protectors and firefighters and bodyguards. Winston Churchill said during a time of war, the truth is so precious, it must be protected by bodyguards of lies. I have my bodyguards, I have my protectors that don't allow me to get into those exiled places, those cages where my infinite soul lives. I have no access to it. It's called in Kabbalah a klipa. There's a heavy shell and a husk, a dense husk that blocks my access to it. And therefore I believe that it doesn't exist, but if I can have the courage to open myself up, and this takes work and courage, to my core self, you'll notice immediately that you're full of creativity, and you're full of compassion, and you're full of joy, and you're full of spiritedness. Judaism refuses to believe that trauma can destroy your core, that your core can be tarnished and tainted and obliterated and decimated. It can be hidden. But if God is indestructible, your core and my core is indestructible. If God is confident, by definition, you are full of confidence and possibility and charm and joy and compassion and sensitivity and goodness and glory and splendor and holiness and sacredness. And the soul feels that on Yom Kippur, and therefore the first thing we do on Yom Kippur, now come back with me to the song and you'll hear the song. Everything I just said in this lecture is all in that tune of Kol Nidre. Ahai, ahai, ahai. You hear what's going on? You hear the trauma? Ahai, 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 ahai. All the promises, yes. Ah, da 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 da. All the pledges, and all the oaths, and all the bans, and all the prohibitions, that I have accepted on myself. And as we reach the end of Kol Nidre, we sing those fateful defining words. My promises are no promises, and my pledges are no pledges. Ay, 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 the soul can soar. Imagine a bird whose wings have literally been clipped or tied down. Those are the pledges we make to ourselves. I tied down myself in shackles. Ask yourself, what are those pledges you made for yourself? What are those ropes that are holding me down? You know, people sometimes say, people today are afraid of exposing their darkness, their skeletons, their ghosts, their demons. We're afraid. I want to say something to you, friends. I think people are afraid of their darkness, but people are much more afraid of their light. People are so afraid of their light. People are afraid of failure. Let me tell you something. People are afraid of success. Relative success, I'm fine with, but real success, not me. And we have this beautiful word for it. It's called humility. You know that word? Humility. Who do you think you are? We tell ourselves, who do I think I am to shine? Who am I? What am I? Queen of England? Who do you think you are? We're afraid of our light. I say, who am I to shine? Who am I? I'm a nobody, a piece of garbage. I'm a schmatte. I'm a behemoth. Especially if you had somebody tell that to you as a child. It helps. I belong in the dustbin. Who am I to shine? Who am I to be gorgeous? Who am I to be successful? Who am I to be powerful? Who am I to be potent? Who am I to have an impact? Who am I to change the world? I'm supposed to be in a cage, locked up, doing my own thing and not bothering anybody and not making a ruckus and not making a ripple effect and having fingers pointing at me. Ha! A night prima donna, Miss America. A new ball guy in the steppen. Let me tell you something. You never help other people shine when you eclipse your own light. It's the other way around. When your light shines in its full glory, you inspire my light to shine. Because nobody's light competes with anybody else's light. You ask, who are you to shine? What do you mean who you are? You're a princess. You're a daughter of God. What do you mean who you are? You're a chelik alikam. You're a piece of Hashem. What type of question is who are you to shine? What type of question is, who are you to have an incredible life? What type of question is it, who are you to have an incredibly inspiring, meaningful, uplifting, rich relationship, rich life filled with light and promise? So the first thing you got to do in Yom Kippur is, you got to say goodbye. Goodbye to all those messages that block me and block us very, very deep down. Block us from access to that absolute emancipation that comes from our recognition of who we really are. I have to be able to look at all those shells and husks and understand them. Be compassionate towards them. Feel for them. But don't allow them to be the sole dictators of your destiny. Have the ability to say Kol Nidre, not just with words, but viscerally, with your gut, with your internal system, to really be able to allow yourself to come out in that way. And you know, my dearest friends, when I think about Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, you know, I remember that moment, and it's an important moment in Jewish history, when those two friends from Missouri served together in the First World War. And they became close, and they opened together a haberdashery store. The young people here don't know what a haberdashery store is, but they go to Costco. And of course it goes bankrupt. And the partners split up. The uniqueness is usually when a store goes bankrupt, the two partners don't talk to each other again. But one of the partners was such an innocent and scrupulous person, he decided he's going to pay back every debt, even though he declared bankruptcy. And for decades, he collected pennies and nickels and dimes and dollars, and he paid back every debt. One of the partners went into politics, and the other one became a bettler, what you would call a schnorrer. In the old St. Louis, today you don't use that word. A peddler, selling schmattes. One went to Congress, and ultimately, we know his story because he became the President of the United States of America, known as Harry S. Truman. And the other one, Eddie Jacobson, the Zeta. Just joking. Eddie Jacobson who was selling shmatas. But God runs the world. And in 1947, in November, the United Nations agrees on the partition plan. Part of Palestine under the British mandate would go to the Arabs, but part would go to the Jews. They can have their own little, it was not big, but a little slice of land in the ancient Eretz Yisrael where Jews can be independent and free, and Holocaust survivors can return without the British mandate forbidding them to come back. But the Arabs reject the partition plan and threaten war. And ultimately, it's a very, very difficult situation. Israel, the Jews are once again isolated on the world arena. The State Department is absolutely opposed to even hearing about the existence of Israel. And Harry Truman doesn't really want to create a ruckus and fight with all of his advisors in his own State Department. He has enough tsaras in the America of 1947. And that's when everybody remembers about that Jew, Eddie Jacobson, Kansas City. And everybody remembers that Jew, and they call Eddie and they say, you gotta go to Harry Truman. But they're friends. He can't go into the White House and start getting involved in politics. But Eddie Jacobson did that, and he went into the White House, and Truman smelled what he's there for. And in his diary, he writes how Truman, uttered some words that I won't repeat here in the shul, but they weren't very gracious. And that's when Eddie Jacobson pleaded with him to meet Chaim Weizmann, who would later become the first president of Israel. Truman he's not happy, he's upset, but he can't refuse his old friend. And he gets a meeting for Weizmann, and Truman is convinced. Weizmann says there are some presidents that God gives them an opportunity to do something in history that will last forever. Jews have not had a land for 2,000 years. And when Ben-Gurion declares statehood in May 1948, despite the State Department, Harry Truman immediately sends a message that America supports and stands behind Israel, despite the fact that there's already a war, 7 Arab countries trying to destroy Israel. A few years ago, there was an AIPAC conference in Washington, right before Corona, and they honored Eddie Jacobson's daughter, an old lady. And she got up, she spoke, and she said, when my father died on his deathbed, he looked at me, and he said, my dear daughter, I want to apologize. Many American dads who worked hard in the 40s and 50s and 60s, they left their kids a lot of money. And Eddie says to his daughter, I left you nothing. What your Bubba would call chai kak bupkis. Bupkis. And he apologizes to his daughter. She says, I turned to my father and I said, you left me nothing. You left me with the greatest gift. You gave the Jewish people Israel. Don't say you gave me nothing. And he died in peace. This is what she shared in AIPAC a few years ago. And I thought to myself, Eddie Jacobson owned a haberdashery store, for God's sake, that sold underwear and undershirts. And if you would have told him in the early 1900s, after the First World War, the 1920s, you're going to be responsible for Israel. It's almost like I'll tell you, tomorrow you're going to be chosen as the new Queen of England instead of King Charles. Tomorrow we're moving to Mars. Okay, so if you were Chabad, fine. Where should you go? Not to Mars? But if not, it's like, I live in St. Louis, not on Mars. Tell Eddie Jacobson, but God runs the world. And in that moment's notice, he had the courage of going into the White House, uninvited, unexpected, and to the dismay of his best friend, he literally, he twisted his arm. And the results were historic. Close to 7 million Jews today live in Israel. If you visit Israel, and you should, say thanks to Eddie Jacobson. He didn't allow the image of, who am I, to define his story. He should have told the Jewish leadership, the Jewish political leadership, who am I? I sell underwear. I'm not a UN guy. I'm not a White House guy. I'm not a State Department guy. I'm not a macher. I'm a simple Jew trying to pay back debts from a bankruptcy in 1921. Sorry, go to somebody else, right? He should have said that. He didn't. He took a train, and he traveled to Washington, and he walked into Truman, and he said, Harry, sometimes history demands of you to make a move. For me, that's a very inspiring moment. Because if Eddie can do it, anybody can do it. You just have to believe that you're not a mistake. You have to believe that when God conceived you, it wasn't an error. You're not just an infinitesimal droplet on the surface of infinity amounting to nothing. You got that? You have to understand you were conceived in love. Every soul was sent down here with a purpose. Yes, we struggle. Yes, we have upheavals. Yes, we make mistakes. Yes, some of us make big mistakes. Yes, sometimes we're stupid. I'm talking about the men. Yes, we're insecure. Now I'm talking about both. Okay, not the women, the men. Yes, we're meek, the men. Yes, we're timid. Yes, the men. The women, perfect. At least the women in my life. I don't know about you. The women in my life, perfect. You see, my wife trained me well. Yes, of course we make mistakes. But at our core, we were conceived in love. We were sent here in love. That question of who am I is not part of the equation. And if I can really tune into that, and I change that paradigm shift, and I know how to stay kol nidre, I can experience a year with no miscarriage. And instead of saying, Hayoim Aras Olam, today is the day when I will remain eternally pregnant, I can say, today is the day when I will finally be born and cast my light, your light on the universe. Yogi Berra. Remember Yogi Berra? Olav Shalom Alichtik Gan Eden. His wife once turned to him and said, Yogi Berra, where should I bury you when you die? He said, what type of question, honey? She said, I'm confused. You were born in Missouri. You live in New Jersey. But you play for New York. Where do I bury you? Missouri, New Jersey, New York. He looked at his wife and said, surprise me. I say to you, my dear friends, this year, surprise yourself. Thank you, Shana Tova.